Welcome to the podcast dedicated to living a revenue culture. Long-term business success is the result of creating maximum profit. And the only way you can do that is by first having a purpose-driven, people-first culture. And so in this podcast series, we bring you people who are out there in the real world working on how do I create people-first cultures so we can make a lot of money together. Today, we've got Kelly Stewart as our guest. And Kelly's a certified conversation changer. She's an expert in working with leaders who have a vision for success, and she's grounded in appreciative inquiry. And we're going to ask her to talk a little bit about that today. And she's specialized in knowledge and tools that foster collaboration and surface new ideas and boost engagement in people in an organization. She's a speaker, a consultant, a co-host of her own podcast, Doing Good Business. Is that the right title, Kelly?
That's correct.
And she's in the past, before she became a conversation changer, she was in brand and B2B marketing and strategy. So I want to welcome Kelly to our podcast.
Thank you very much, Rick. I am so excited to be here today.
So, Kelly, tell me a little bit about your background, both the conversation changer and the appreciative inquiry are new to me as a business or a personal commitment. So, share with us what that means.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'll start there. So appreciative inquiry is an approach to organizational change that's been around for more than 30 years. Dr. David Cooperrider and associates that he worked with brought this to life as part of, I think it was his dissertation, if I'm not mistaken, many years ago, through Case Western, and they had done some work with the Cleveland Clinic. So that's really where it kind of began. And it is based on some principles that we construct our own reality, that what we focus on, we actually do find and get more of, things like that. So there's about 5 principles of the original principles. And then there are emerging principles like the one of wholeness, the narrative, how our stories really do shape who we are and where we're going to go. And so that appreciative inquiry, he generously put it out there for everyone to use, and it has evolved over time. It continues to evolve, and it's used in different ways. And one of the areas, so actually 2 areas where I first found it, was in a strategic framework called SOAR, which is Strengths, Opportunities, Aspirations, and Results. Very much grounded in appreciative inquiry. And that was kind of my entree to this world where my eyes opened up and I was like, okay, almost everything I've ever believed about the way things could be done in business is here. This is like, for me, it was going into my candy store. So I learned about that. And then I learned about Conversations Worth Having. One of the co-authors of SOAR is the co-author of Conversations Worth Having. That's also grounded in appreciative inquiry. And, by that time, I was already sold on the value that was being created. And I think a lot of that comes from my background. So you mentioned I had a background in B2B marketing. I think, my first big girl job, I was in client services, new business development. And I've always worked for companies that were small organizations, but they served much larger organizations, very long sales lead cycles. The clients, it was a big commitment that they were making. So it was not transactional. So the relationship was important to me just by nature of who I am. But the relationship was always important to business success. And I found in that I was often the face of the company that I worked for. And very often I was also the voice of the customer. So I was constantly looking for what's working, what's good, what can we talk about? How do we create this relationship with someone where we are resonating with them, not only on the intellectual levels with which they make their decision, but on the emotional levels where they make their decisions to do business with someone. I just didn't have any other vocabulary for it back in the day, but that's where I was headed with it. So during kind of my last stint where I was more focused on marketing, I witnessed, well, actually, it was 2 times where I witnessed what I thought was significant shifts in an industry. Of course, they pale in comparison to what we're seeing today. But back in the time, like these were really significant shifts. And I was able to observe 2 leaders in 2 separate companies, 2 different industries, separated by about 10 years, where the leaders really were first and foremost curious about the changes that were happening in their industry. They were compassionate in their approach to bringing people along, and they were confident in what they were doing. And these were the companies that not only did they kind of bounce back from what was happening in the industry, but they were actually sort of sought after as things progressed because they were leading the way. And they did so in a way that was very inclusive, less competitive, and more cooperative, right? Like, hey, this is what we're learning. We'll share these best practices with you. And that had also always stayed with me. So I think that when I found Appreciative Inquiry through SOAR and through Conversations Worth Having, I was in. Give me my
Wow.
ticket.
It's interesting as you use the curious, compassionate, uh, inquiring, those terms, my brain just goes, wow, what a cool culture you're creating when that's the profile of the leadership.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
and as I was listening to you talk about your story of being both the face of the customer and your own company to create a conversation, to be in a place where they're empowering you to do that, that alone is pretty cool.
Yes. Yes. Oh, well, and it was necessary for a long-term relationship. I used to tell people I've worked in boom and bust economies. I've worked with collaborative and contentious clients, and I've worked alongside helpful and hurtful colleagues, right? So guess what I prefer? I would rather prefer boom economies with collaborative clients and helpful colleagues. So I was always seeking that. And again, this is where I feel for me, these were some of the things when I learned about appreciative inquiry, it felt very natural. And a lot of it is there's a lot of science that it's based on, but part of that is nature and things that we think have no purpose or look rather chaotic or unimportant is all part of a larger system in nature that we see. No one wakes up in the morning and says, okay, flowers, now you need to open up and you need to turn and look at the sun. You need to soak up, like nobody says that to a plant. It happens. And so when we look at those things, we realize that those things can happen in our organization. Ironically, the name organization. So we're going to take something that could naturally occur, a little guidance, a little water, right? A little care and feeding, and we're going to organize it. And I think that's part of the mess that a lot, that we're in now in a lot of different areas is we've spent so much time organizing it that we've kind of tamped down the naturally occurring successes.
That's fascinating. The people who've gone through our revenue science community and become certified, one of the gentlemen in that is really studying a concept called emergence. And
Okay.
emergence very much sounds like what you're describing, that there's a natural order to how things develop. And it's more up to us to pay enough attention to take advantage of it than us think we're the ones who are crafting. And that sounds
Exactly.
very similar to what you're describing.
Exactly. It really is. And it's one of my greatest compassions is for established business leaders, because I feel, and you kind of referenced this in our earlier conversation, that everything that established business leaders have been taught to do to be successful in business was successful for them up to a certain point. And that's becoming less and less successful. And one of the areas where I have my greatest compassion for them is there was a time when the leader was supposed to have all of the answers, right? It was just the way business was. We didn't have a lot of new entrants because it was hard to break into a market. And actually, what you did know, because we didn't have the internet, what you did know was protected information, and you wanted to kind of keep that to yourself. And so the hierarchy, it depended on that, all of the processes and the systems. Again, there wasn't a lot of organicness, right? We were still kind of pulling forward other successes, which was manufacturing and how do we get it all to fall in line. Exactly. And so I think one of the opportunities, because I don't look at it as a challenge, but one of the opportunities for business leaders is to get more comfortable in the not knowing and improve their skills around asking the right questions, because the questions that we used to ask are less relevant also. And that's not a judgmental observation. That's just saying what my dad says. We used to go out west in wagons, and we don't do that anymore. So things, they are changing. And so a lot of it has to change, but it doesn't have to be onerous.
Now, is that part of the conversation changer piece?
Yes. So it doesn't necessarily roll off the tongue, but we ask a lot of generative questions, and generative questions are questions that we don't have an answer for. So I'll give you an example of that. Let's say, I was the team leader of a project and you were doing something, and I see that the deadline, you're not quite making the deadline. And I could just go into you and say, what are you doing? How come how come you're not on track with this, Rick? Right? Because those are perfectly reasonable questions. When do you think you're going to get this done, Rick? Well, those are limiting questions. But if I was to come to you and say, Rick, tell me, because I don't know what's going on, right? And so I could come to you and say, Rick, tell me what you know so far about where the project is. Now I'm going to learn things, because again, now we're going to talk about the physiological aspect of this, right? The brain science, that's also part of appreciative inquiry. When we're approaching our conversations from a relaxed state, from a we, not me. And if we're asked questions that put us on the defensive, we go to me. But if we're asked questions where we're part of the group, we go to we. Well, sure. You could say, Kelly, let me tell you, this is what's happened. And we had this unexpected supply chain disruption, right? So now I'm getting information as the leader that is useful to me, rather than yeah, no problem. I know I'm going to have it done next week. Why? What's going to change? I don't even know what was stopping the delay, So it's worth it to ask these generative questions that kind of create this we mindset, but also help to make the invisible visible. They help to create a shared understanding. And it's because you approach it without thinking, I already know the answer to this, or I'm going to catch someone in something that they're saying.
Well, it's interesting. In our work, one of the things we measure is the cost of the chaos to produce revenue. And in a B2B world, the cost of chaos is between 20 and sometimes in complex, high tech, 50% of top line.
Right.
And much of that is, the cross silo lack of communication. And it's not that people don't want to go to the goal of the company, or they don't want to work as a unit. They have no way to communicate across the silos. My undergraduate degree, I was a cost accountant, so I spoke accounting. I had a master's degree in marketing, so I also speak marketing. But most people speak one language, yet silos, there's 7 or 8 or 10, and they all speak their own language. And do you help them level that?
I sure do. And this is, again, I can be so proud and speak so highly of it because it's not my approach, right? But baked into appreciative inquiry is a structure and a language. So we've talked a little bit about the language. The structure of it is to literally bring people together in one room, as many stakeholders as possible. It tends to be the employees, but it could be other people. It could be organizations that supply services to your
Sure.
company. Let's say your accounting, right? Your accounting company, your insurance company, people who know your business and know you, because they also have ideas and perspectives and knowledge that's helpful to you in forming strategy when we're talking about strategy. But also what it is you bring everyone together and you work in smaller groups. So you start off in paired interviews, and then you're part of a team, and then you share some highlights with your team, and then the team reports out. One person reports out from the team to the whole group. And that's where critical mass starts building around certain ideas. So that's really important in understanding, what do people think? So everyone gets a voice in this type of a structure. And what happens is you're working with people who have never worked together before.
Yeah.
So you could have top level executives working with frontline customer service people. Wow. Right. And you can have people working from different divisions. So it's just this wonderful way to literally inquire about what's going on with people that you might not have necessarily worked with before. And isn't that a way to get a fresh perspective on what's going on inside of the company?
I bet not only haven't they worked together, but most of the time, without ever meeting the other people, they're blaming them for the problems they have. Wow,
Absolutely.
those people in finance don't understand what's going on out here in the factory. And
Exactly.
yeah,
And that very well may be true. Typically, our conversations, and this goes to the conversation changing, right? The conversation changing is that me versus we, and that those assumptions that we just know what's going on already. And we may not know really what's going on in the organization. And it's those little kernels of best practices or knowledge or systems that sometimes make the greatest impact. I'm still kind of like in mourning over the percentage cost of chaos because that's a significant number, and it's kind of hurting my heart, my business heart, right? And I'm like, how do we bring that down, and what might we uncover in some of these conversations where the what seemingly is the smallest thing makes the biggest difference? And I get a lot too. What I hear is, well, we don't have the resources for that. So
yeah,
one of the first things we want to do is flip it and say, well, if we had all the resources for that, what would it look like? What would we be doing? Invariably, someone will offer up in their paired interviews, because that'll be one of the questions. Someone will offer up, oh, well, we don't use that software we've been paying for the last 5 years. So if we cut that out, if nobody's using it, well, that would save us X. Well, there starts the domino, because one of the principles of appreciative inquiry is that we find what we're looking for. So if we are looking for resources rather than advocating for why we don't have them, it'll never work. We don't have enough money. We're never going to get that. Guess what? You're never going to get resources, because the brain is too busy chronicling why the resources aren't there and not looking for where the resources might be.
now do you leave your clients with tools or glossaries or some way that they can bake this into their forever culture?
Mhm. Yes. So, and that doesn't always happen. It doesn't have to happen, but there is a growing trend in our community of professionals where we see companies who have worked with these, and it can be nonprofit organizations as well. Organizations that work with appreciative inquiry. There's a growing trend to become an appreciative organization or a generative organization, which
Okay.
is really, taking this long term and saying, how do we kind of co-op Mike Myers here? How do we put the emphasis on the other syllable, right? We've been looking so long at what's broken or what's missing. How do we get in the habit of finding what's working and building upon that? And there's a whole variety of things that people can do. One of the things that I recommend, I also work with the Center for Appreciative Inquiry, and they offer a whole suite of online trainings, coaching, facilitation, resiliency, diversity and inclusion, They offer the Conversations Worth Having boot camps are run through there. So, if you're going to spend your training dollars, your professional development dollars somewhere, start to really build that culture there. I also can do trainings so that I could go in and work with an organization and I stay on because I don't want them to just once
Right.
and done. So,
Right.
I'm a ongoing resource to them in any way that they need. It's very organic. It's not really overly prescriptive, as you might imagine. So it's what the organization needs. But there are certain kind of tools and tips that people can use. And it starts with the desire to change. And then you've got to work at this to really help it become a habit. You're
I want,
smiling. You've seen it.
well, I want to pick up on what you just said about the desire to change.
Mhm.
One of the things that we believe is fundamental to a culture is the culture's purpose.
Mhm.
And organizations have two choices, and both are legitimate, but they're completely different. One choice is I can be in business to make as much money as I can possibly make in the shortest period of time. Like in the pandemic, if I had a warehouse full of toilet paper and cleaning supplies, I can mark them up like crazy and get really rich in a short period. Yep. And we call that a mercenary
Yeah.
culture. And it's legitimate. We all needed toilet paper, and so let's go buy it. But the
Mhm.
other is what we call a big purpose culture. And that
Mhm.
is you plan to make a lot of money, but you're going to make the world a better place while you do it.
Exactly.
And when we look at who becomes your customer, you get a completely different customer if you're a big purpose organization than if you're a mercenary. And you get completely different employees if you're a big purpose versus a mercenary. So we try to get organizations to at least declare their purpose. We're not trying to tell them what they want to be, but whatever it is, declare it so that people can choose.
Mhm.
And because if you don't declare it, they're going to make it up.
Absolutely.
And so
Because your
how
brand
does
is your culture and your culture is your brand. That's still
absolutely.
true. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
how does that fit? Does purpose fit into your work? That's a long way of asking a short question.
Absolutely. Purpose, I think inherently, because of the way this approach pulls from the best of what is, and that's what it's doing. It's pulling from the best of what it is. So there is a underlying triple bottom line nature to this of people, planet, and profit. One of my favorite quotes around that is from like the father of sustainability. He's in the UK, John Elkington, and he always says that concern, that's all, concern for people and planet can coexist with an ambition for profit. And so that's what we look at when we're talking on the strategic conversations, when we're talking about what are we going to measure, we talk about what are the meaningful measures that indicate we're on success. Part of the SOAR framework is aspirations, because we talk about who do we want to be when this initiative is complete, or it's 18 months from now. What do we want to be known for? Because we've seen companies that really shed their mission, vision, and values, even if it's on a plaque on the wall, they shed it pretty quickly in pursuit of profit. All right. So if you've lost some of that, then it's not successful. So that's a metric that we have to look at. Are we still living our values? Are we doing this in ways that bring us peace and comfort and do that? It's about creating real value for others. And that's something that I think has been lost, because that's simply coming down to how do we improve someone's lives? And it's someone's, even if it's B2B, because we're working with people.
Sure.
How do
Yeah.
we improve someone's lives in ways that just didn't exist before we started working with them?
Yeah.
And my example, I mean, sure, are you going to get the pet rock? Absolutely, right? And that was commercially very successful. Did it bring people a lot of joy and fun? It sure did. Did it improve their lives? We could make the argument, yes. And it explains why it's sold, right? So
Yeah.
you have the pet rock, but you also have something like the toothbrush. And one of my favorite books is Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery. And he said that for him, the single greatest invention was the toothbrush, because the first time he was able to brush his teeth, his whole world opened up to him. He felt so much more confident. And I think I'm going to overgeneralize that we are in a business climate where like we're sometimes overreaching, and we overlook the simple things that we could be doing. Again, it's that one little kernel that influences the strategy. We look at the simple things we could be doing that make a world of difference. I just recently ordered a book through Amazon that came from a local bookstore, and in it came a little handwritten note on a little piece of paper. We really appreciate your purchase. We hope you were happy with everything. If you were, please leave us some feedback. Will. And I was like, huh, what I got? Like it made my day in a time where you feel largely forgotten as a customer in many cases. So it's those little things that happen that create a lot of value for other people. But that's your area more than mine.
Oh, very cool. When we think about building cultures, one of the things that at least I mentally struggle with is, where do you start building the culture? And somehow my brain says it should start pre-hiring. I should be setting the right expectations in my employment ads or in my letter to do an interview. Or so when you think about your work, how can you apply it from the very beginning, even the pre-interview and the interview and the onboarding, so that it's not even questioned that this is how we live?
Right. It has to be self-evident, right? And we all work in this informed, connected, transparent market now. So if you say this is who we are, there has to be evidence. So you touched on an example that I use. Companies will be like, we're all about the relationship. It's really what matters. And they do that through the new business development phase, and it's relationship, relationship, relationship. Oh, you're signing on the dotted line? Hold on a second. Thud. Here comes our contract, which does not say we trust you or have a relationship. It says we anticipate we'll be breaking up, and we want to make sure we're protected.
Yeah.
So,
and then we're going to win the lawsuit.
Exactly. So to your point, right, we need to have that throughout the whole organization. And I do believe that kind of comes from the top. It is looking at things through an appreciative lens and saying, does the contract, followed very closely by the employee manual, right? Do we even call it an employee manual? Isn't that something that comes like with your Xerox machine? You get like an operating manual. Does this even apply to humans? So it's really looking at things appreciatively to say, what does work? Who else has been doing great things out there that we might be able to curate some of their practices or learn from what they're doing? What's some of the new research that's going, oh, here's an idea. Why don't we get a group of new employees together and ask them, what did you like about the process, right? Or what would you like to see more of in the process? What really stood out for you as a high point experience in this process? And to be able and willing to experiment a little bit, which I don't think we see enough of. And I think that comes from our unending quest to mitigate risk, which is a good and necessary thing, to the point that it starts to stifle innovation.
Well, in today's world, mitigating risk, and I know it's necessary, but we so overdo it that we define risk as I want to keep doing what I'm doing, and I think I'm still going to get the same result. Well, that's ridiculous, because everything's changing so fast. If you keep doing what you're doing, the one thing you're sure of is you're not going to get the same result you got yesterday.
Exactly.
And yet we somehow cling to that and believe it's a good idea. And even if we stay the same, all of our customers and our employees are changing, and we're not matching them. So I love the approach to your conversation, because it's a way for us to continually grow or change or improve or modify.
Mhm. Which we're supposed to be doing, right? We are also living organisms.
But
And
we're
that
not
is what
we're not going to do it though till next year's plan.
exactly, exactly. And from a marketing perspective, also, just an observation of mine is when we only differentiate ourselves marginally because we don't want to put ourselves out there too far, should we be surprised that we all sound alike? No, we should not. We have to really get to the unique and inspiring ways in which our organization creates value for others. And that's really challenging. It can be challenging because, first of all, we have a hard time talking about our strengths as individuals, but then collectively as an organization, we feel if we do it well, everybody else does it well, or we don't even recognize it's a strength, which is why I like to bring other stakeholders into some of these conversations because they know things about us that we don't see. And so there's that. Then there is the risk issue, right? Because if we don't want to do too much to stand out, then are we really communicating the value that we bring? Not necessarily.
Yeah.
And then the frameworks that we use, I mentioned SOAR at the beginning, and the compare and contrast there is to the SWOT analysis. Perfectly fine. It's, and here's the differences. It's an analysis. SOAR is an approach to something.
Right.
And, when you get into the body chemistry of it all and the neuroscience of it all, when we introduce those weaknesses and threats, we're done. You're
Yeah.
done. And it's not a judgment of any one individual. This is the way we're wired to be, right? The amygdala wants to make sure that we're safe. And when we're talking about big money, big decisions, people's lives, their livelihood, right? These are things we do have to take into consideration. And so when we look at things, what SOAR and Appreciative Inquiry and even, conversations worth having helps you do is to say, let's look at that threat. Let's pull it apart. Is there an opportunity in here? Because then you start to change the conversation, and I'm completely oversimplifying it.
No.
Right. And weaknesses we just don't talk about because there's really not a lot we can do in the immediate future for that. So let's say there's something an organization wants to do and they realize, oh, we just don't have the bench strength in this area. We're going to go into a new market. Perfect. Fine. We need to hire and bring people on to do that. That's typically a longer term play than what is going to be our strategic plan for the next 6 months. Or we have a 3-year strategic plan. How is my department going to implement it? Well, if you need to go out and hire a whole bunch more people, you're not making your goals in 6 months, right? Because then you're going to have to onboard them. So let's just start with the strengths and let's just stay focused on the strengths. Exactly. Yeah. How can you find them? But when you talk about strengths and you ask people to tell their stories, which we didn't really even get into, but this is really, that's the language. Not only is it positive and generative and appreciative inquiry, but it relies so much on people's stories because it's in their stories that you find out about best practices, hidden talents you didn't know they had, right? Someone exactly. And just what they love to do, because what they love to do, they will do better and faster. Sometimes we've heard it all before. You've got the right people in the wrong seats on the bus, right? But if you find someone is like loves data visualization and does that all in their part-time at home, hello, we could probably use you somewhere else here, and that person's happier. So it's a win-win, but I think those are the things that really stop us from, and by us, I mean the organization, from talking about the value that we bring. It's not because we don't know what it is or we couldn't really figure it out, but the tools we've been using and just our human nature kind of works against us in that way.
I want to extend your conversation. You started out by talking about your career where you were equally customer facing and organization facing, and you were creating additional value by understanding both sides of that equation. So take the conversation piece and the curiosity and the understanding of value and help us. How do we, we use a term, we use a comparison of, as an organization, are you headquarters out which means you sit in headquarters and you decide what the world needs, and then you go out and find it and beat it into submission and get it to give you money. Or you're a buyer back, and your organization is so attuned to the buyer that they're when you go to the buyer, they see you as a partner immediately because of your empathy and your understanding and your research before you go. And you spend your time clarifying and solidifying how to work together rather than trying to beat them into submission. And so as I'm listening, I'm going, wow, the great internal conversations. Can you take what you do and take it external to create that buyer back conversation as well?
Absolutely. I can give you a couple of examples of that. So if you
So
if you are in front of a prospective client, right, and like you laid it out perfectly, you've done all of your research, so some questions that you could ask immediately are, first of all, what is it you'd like to accomplish? Because you're going to want to test your own assumption in that. What is it that you would like to accomplish in all of this? What would make it a home run for you? What could we do as an organization that would really kind of compel you? You're going to be talking about it at cocktail parties. You're going to be telling your colleagues, you're going to be like, I can't, this went so over the top and I didn't even think it would be possible, because that's what you want to get to. What is their expectation? What would make you so happy that we could deliver? You're not saying you can, but at least you will know what that is. And then you've got something you could work toward, because you're going to find out in that response, is it the relationship? Is it the budget? Is it coming in on time? Is it one of 3 or 4 other things that you haven't thought about because you don't have the answer to that question yet, right? You really don't know.
I've got to interrupt because I'm so excited about what you're talking about. One of the things that we try to get organizations to do is we will tell them never, ever after today, use the word demo. And we say that because the demo is about the seller and the buyer cares about the buyer. So quit doing something that you know in advance they don't care about.
Right. Exactly.
The second part is we say replace the demo with a preview, which the preview is this, all those things you were just saying, plus what would it be like when you get here? What would it feel like? What would differences would it make, whether it's emotional, financial, organizational, cultural? And it's when you have that conversation is the only time you can really identify the value you're transferring to the buyer. And it sounds like you've got the skill set, the approach to help people do that, because we say that to people and they go, yeah, we should do that, but they haven't got a clue how to do it.
How to do it. Right. Well, I have to say, I've mentioned this to you already. You are just very naturally in tune to appreciative inquiry. And so you touched on 2 things. I'll share another question. You could also ask, tell me about another, let's say it's technology. Tell me about some other technology that you're using. It has nothing to do with me or my company that you really, really love. What do you love about it?
Yes, yes.
Right. Because then that's a way to understand, 99.999% uptime. Yeah, important. But no, what really makes that a good working relationship for us is, so you're going to get that information. And then, oh, shoot, I hate it when it goes out of my head. Oh, well, we're going to have to come back because you used a word there. And I was like, oh, yes, that's it. Sorry, I apologize. It went completely out of my head, but.
We could go on forever. And I want to, I got to say 2 things. One, I want to ask you one last question, but I do think what you're describing is an incredible offer for organizations to be able to, if you're a thought leader organization, and everybody kind of thinks they are, but if you really are, or can do something your buyer doesn't know or can't do without you. And so you must help them preview what their world will look like with this thing they really don't understand. And so all those skills and those tools and that approach that you just went through is a deficit in almost every organization today. There's an occasional person or two that know how to do it. They took a class of yours or something, but the
Right.
organizations don't know how to do it.
Right.
So my statement is figure out how to train organizations how to do that because it is the missing skill set today. So
Absolutely. I think thank you for that. And I can see that it's about creating context for it. And
yeah,
people are busy and they're confused. And so, how is your organization different from the other one? And I can go Google technology, and Capterra can tell me, here's like, now what? Do I feel like I've gotten any further along? I'm not sure. So, you'd need that additional context that comes from all the things we were talking about. What do you do well? What are your aspirations in this? If it is only mercenary, that's going to come through very quickly. If it's purpose driven, if you're working with other organizations that also are purpose driven, that's a great thing.
and the other part of that, Kelly, is, and you nailed it, is the mercenary is transactional, short term. It's very finite in conversation. If we really are a value added player, we are a long term play. So whatever they ask us to come in and talk about is short term. We have to
Right.
transfer that to if you buy whatever it is you buy today, it has a long term impact. Whether you want to
Absolutely.
acknowledge it or not, it has. And the mercenary doesn't care about you long term. They only care
No.
about that. But if we're really a partner, whatever we're bringing you now, we should have a conversation with you about the future.
Absolutely. And I think that's the visual difference for me is in thinking of what was the value chain, which almost immediately you can see where, well, we'll just cut off that link and we'll get rid of that supplier, whatever, to the value web. And we are just increasingly all more interconnected, and that's the way it's going to continue to go. So if you see yourself as part of the value web where what you're supplying to your customer also depends what I call all the people essential to your success.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
so who are you buying your products and services from, and who are your employees, and who are the people who are providing services to you, because that all allows you to be part of your client's value web. And they've got other partners, and how might you work with them to
Yes.
create more value for the client? And that's where, shedding some of these habits that we're in, from competition to coopetition.
Yep.
I think I'm making it up. I'm not really sure, but it's like that we're working together. We don't have to, be besties, but we do. If we pull out like the remix, if we pull out a little bit about what you do and a little bit about what we do together, we're going to create more value for this client and have that long-term relationship.
Well, and in our world, we would say the exact same thing because people believe if people have even thought about culture really, they tend to think it's the shareholder, the leadership, and the employee. And in a revenue science standpoint, we would say, well, yeah, it's them, but it's also your partners, it's also your community, it's also your future employees, your future customers, and it's that whole milieu that is really making the impact. And you can get some of your best insights from partners or the community or customers, even people who decide not to be customers.
Non-customers, don't we love getting information from them? It's because I'll quote my dad again, bad news is still good information. And when you look at it that way, right? When you don't take bad news and try to blame it on someone, but you just look at it and say, that's not what we wanted, but it's still good information because now we can study it more and start to see, again, pull it apart. Is there an opportunity in this bad news?
Amen. Okay, we're running long, so I have one last
Okay.
question. What's the advice you have for senior leaders about going forward in this crazy world we're in right now where things don't stay the same very long? What
Right.
should they be thinking about? Then the second question is for the new employee coming in, the new person who's looking for their career, what advice do you have for them?
Okay. I think it's the same. I mentioned a little for the established business leader. I think it is about being comfortable not having all the answers because you couldn't possibly, right? I can't even get the words out. There's so much data out there that how could you possibly have all the information? You need to know who are the people closest to the market, who are the people working with it every day. So get comfortable not having all of the answers and think about how different might your life be? Different might your leadership be if you can ask better questions? So that's one. But I think for both the new employee and the established business leader, what might happen? What could you create together if you were able to move to this we mindset and not a me? It's always been adversarial, us against them, right? The leadership versus the rank and file, right? It's so what if those barriers never existed? What if we just pretended like there was never a hierarchy? What might happen if we literally remixed what we were doing and we just felt that like every voice is heard because we know people commit to what they help create. We have a shared vision. If we brought those kind of new tools into what we were doing, how might that be an advantage for us? Just the way electricity was an advantage to us, anesthesia was an advantage to us, right? These were all things that didn't exist before, but then we brought them into what we were doing. And this is the same.
Well, I could go another hour without anything.
I could too.
This is really good conversation and high value. But I want to thank you for being here today. And
Thank you.
this has been excellent. So any last words you want to leave us with?
Well, I encourage everyone, if people want more information, certainly I, share my contact information. They can reach out to me, learn about Appreciative Inquiry, and you can go to the Center for appreciativeinquiry.net for that. You can learn what conversations worth having at cwh.today. However you want to get the information. And if you have questions about it, come ask me because I would be happy to share what I know.
Well, thank you, Kelly, and thank all of you for being with us. This has been it's been great for me. I hope it's as good for you as it was for me. Thank you, and we'll see you the next time.